What's up guys, welcome back to K's Daily Programming. This is the third video of our SQL fundamentals, and in today's video we will be creating our first table, inserting some data and querying the table. So if you haven't watched the first two videos, I'll put the link to those videos in the description box, or you can find the link to the full series in the description box below. So without wasting any time, let's get into this. In the previous videos, I've shown you guys how to install a SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio, and I've explained to you guys how a database is similar to an Excel file. So if you are new to SQL and you haven't seen those videos, I suggest that you go back and see those videos before you come to this one, because things might be a little bit tricky. So I'll put the link to those videos in the description. So if you look here on our left side, it's our Excel file. So this is exactly how a database is going to be throughout this series. So this is the table that we're going to be creating today and the data that we're going to be inserting. So what I try to do is I try to simulate a database of a varsity or a college for a certain course. So if you look at our first sheet, which is going to be our first table, this is going to be our modules table. So this is all the data about the modules that we have. This is the first these are the first year modules, and these are the second year modules, and these are the third year modules. So I just put some space in between so I can separate them so they can look nicer and know which modules belongs to which year, but you can also distinguish that by the column year here. So this is the modules table, and this is our students table. So this holds our students info. We have our student ID, first name, last name, year, and if the student is registered or not. And I also have the marks table. This holds the information, data about the marks for different modules and different assessments. And I also have a GPA grading table here that we're going to be using throughout our whole series. But on today's video, we're going to be focusing on the modules table, because this is the table that we're going to be creating. So in the last video, I showed you guys how to create a database. So with the same procedure, we are going to create our database and work on it for today's video. So we're going to name our database, let's name it fundamentals. So this is our fundamentals database. So I showed you guys in the previous video how to create a database using the interface, or how to create it using code. So it's up to you which one you prefer, but I just use the code because it's much simpler. I just use the interface because it's much simpler than the code. And here's our database that we created. It's fundamentals. And if you double click or click on the little plus sign here, but I'm just going to double click, and you can see all your folders that are in the database. So if I go to tables, since we haven't created any tables yet, you can see that our database is empty. We do not have anything in that database. So what we're going to do today is we're going to create this table, and we're going to insert all this data and query this table. So what you want to do is click on your database and right click and say new query, and it will open our query window. So I'm going to show you guys a create table statement. If you watched our previous video, you will see that it's similar to the create database statement, but it's just some different tweaks here and there that makes it a little more complex than what we created before, because the create database statement, it's straightforward, but when you create a table, there's some things that you have to put in the table, your column names, your data types, and some stuff that I'll explain in the future videos. So our create table statement looks something like this. Create table, and then you give it a table name. So today we're going to be creating our modules table. So let's just name that modules, and then you open your brackets and just close it here. And here between these brackets, this is where you're going to be specifying our columns. And our columns that we have for today's videos is the module ID, it's the module name, the year, and the weight. So our first column, it's the module ID, and we have things called data types when you create your data, when you create your tables. So data type actually describe what kind of data your column will be holding. So I'll explain data types more into details in the next coming video. So for just today, just stick to what we're doing, and I'll give you guys a broad explanation of why should we use data types and which ones to use on a particular column. So for today, we are going to create this table, this first column, and we're going to give it a data type of voucher. And I just like to keep things in a capital letter, especially special words. Okay, voucher, and then we give it a size. I always find that 100 when it comes to voucher, it's the sweet spot for most people. So I'm just gonna put 100 there. So what it means is this is going to hold 100 characters actually. So I'm just gonna put that as 100 for size, and I'm going to make this my primary key. This might not make sense for you now because you don't know what a primary key is or what it does, but for this table, like I said, just stick with what we're doing, and I'll explain these things in the next coming videos. So you want that as a primary key, and the next column that we want, it's our module name, and let's make it a voucher as well. So I can just copy this and avoid typing, and let's make it not null. And then our next column, it's year, and I want to make this an integer, and also I want to make it not null. And our last column that we have there is weight, and weight is a type of a decimal. Let's put that as a decimal, and also for decimal you have to give it a size and the number of the floating points. So I'm just gonna give it a 2, and also I want to make this not null. And this is actually how we create our table. Like I said, it's kind of similar as creating a database, but the statement is different somewhere somehow. So one thing that you guys should know about SQL is SQL is not really case sensitive. So if I were to say something like create table, but I put this as small letters, it does not really matter with SQL. It's still the same statement. Unlike other languages like C# and Java, where something like string, something like this, it's different with something like that. So SQL is not really case sensitive. You can write it however you want. I just like to keep my statements in capital letters. That way, just makes just makes things easy to read. So this is our create table, and this is our create table statement. So what you want to do now is you can actually go and press that execute, or press F5 to execute a statement. So I'm just going to execute this, and you can see here our feedback says our command completed successfully. So if you go to your tables here, like I said in the previous video, when you do things that involve interface changes via code, sometimes you might need to refresh your interface to see those changes, because you can see here the table does not really doesn't show here. So what you can do is you can refresh that, and here you have your table. And if you double click on that table, it shows you the columns that you have, the keys, the constraint, triggers, indexes, and statistics. So we're going to do all of these things in the next coming videos. So what I'm going to show you now is just the columns. These are the columns that you created for this table. So if you just expand that a little, you can see that this is your module ID column, and it has that little key here. It shows that that is your primary key column, and this is your module name, shows you the data type and the size of the data type, and here it's the year, it's an integer, and the weight, which is a decimal. So what we want to do now is I want to query that table to see what data is inside that table. So we're going to write our first select statement. So it goes something like this: select star from, then you specify your table name. So you want to query the module table. We highlight that and execute. You can actually highlight this. So if you don't highlight the statement that you want to execute and go to execute or press F5, it's going to execute all the statements that are inside this window. So for an example, if I just do that and say execute, so it's going to try and create this table again, and it gives you this error that says there's already an object named modules in the database, which is true because it's this table that we created before, but I only want to execute the statement now. So I highlight what I want to execute and go to execute or press F5, and now it shows me that in this table there's no data, but you can see here that this is your table because you have your columns here that you created. You have your module ID, you have your module name and year and weight, and we haven't yet inserted anything in this table. So now what we're going to do is we're going to write the insert statement, how we insert data into our table. But first I want to explain something to you guys. I always get some people confusing what the star here means. This statement, yes, it does retrieve everything in the database. So it retrieves all your data, or all your rows and all your columns. I always get people saying the star or the asterisk here, it means select all or everything in the database. It doesn't really mean select everything. It actually means select all columns. The star means select all columns, and it has nothing to do with the number of rows that you retrieve. So what you can do is, if you don't want a certain column that you want to retrieve, because if you specify the star, it's going to retrieve all your columns. You can see that we only have 4 columns in this table, and these are the columns. But if you wanted maybe a module ID and the module name, you can actually specify the column names that you want to retrieve. So you can just replace that with module ID and say module name, and you execute that query. And now you can see that your results here only contain the module ID and the module name. So the star does not mean retrieve everything in terms of all rows and all columns. No, it just means retrieve all columns. It has nothing to do with your rows. But let's just go back to that and replace that with our star. So what I'm going to show you now, guys, is how to insert data into our table. So this is the data that we'll be inserting today into our table. So before I insert that data, I just want to show you how an insert statement looks like. I have something here that I would like to open. So this is the data that we'll be inserting today. So this is how our insert statement actually look like. Let me just paste it here somewhere where it's more zoom so you can see. So this is our insert statement. So when you insert statement, this is how it goes. It says insert into, then you specify your table name, and after you specify your table names, you specify the columns that you want to insert the data for. So let's say maybe you had a table that takes in null values, and you wanted to insert only the module ID and the module name. So what would you do is you will specify your module ID here and your module name here, and here in the value you will specify the value for that column and the value for the second column that you specify. So what I want to make clear here is you don't always have to insert all the values or all the data in your row. If you have a table that takes null values, you can only specify the columns that you want to insert. So now for an example, what I'm going to show you guys is we're going to replace this with actual data. So for our first row that we want to insert, it's this row here, the highlighted one. So what we want to insert in our table is we want to insert the data for all these columns that are specified in our table. So we will replace the table name with the actual name of our table. So we have the modules, sorry about that, it's modules, and then the first column that we want to specify is one to put in our module ID, and the second one it's our module name and the year. Let's just cancel that and replace it with weight. And in here, inside the value section, these are the values that we're going to provide or we're going to insert in our tables. So the first value here, it's going to be our module ID. So this is our module ID. I'm just going to copy that from there and paste it in here. And our second value in here, it's going to be our second value is going to be, so our second value here is going to be our module name, and our module name we're going to specify that from there, it's development software. And then I want you to get to see the difference between what I'm going to do here. So for the first two values that we provided, you can see that these values are inside the single quotes. That is because these values are of a voucher or of a string or a text type. But when you're working with numerical values, you don't actually have to specify the single quotes. You can actually put the number as it is. You can still put the single quote, it will go through, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You can just put the number as it is. So for year, if it's, because it's a numerical, I'm just going to say 1. And then weight, it's also numerical. I'm just going to say 1.5. So that's our data. So you can see that I didn't have to specify the single quotes for the year and the weight, because these two are data types of a numeric. But you can still put that if you want. It will go through and inserting it into a database, into a table, but it's not necessary to do that. I don't like to do that. It gives me, so when I don't do that, it actually gives me a sense of making things easy in terms of showing me that now I'm actually inputting a type of a numeric, now you're actually inputting a type of a string, of a text. So this is how our insert statement looks like. So a few things to explain here. When you write your insert statement and you specify the columns here that you're going to be inserting the values for, so take note that the first value here correspond with the first column specified, and the second value here, the second data here, correspond with the second column specified here, and the year same as the weight. So this does not necessarily have to be in this order, or doesn't necessarily have to be in the order that is specified in your table. So you can put module ID at the end if you want. You can just put it however you want, but just make sure that whenever if you put module ID at the end, just make sure that here as well in your values, your module ID is specified at the end. Because what it's going to do is, remember this little statement that I showed you here. So the value 1 here will always correspond with column 1, and value 2 will always correspond with column 2, and value 3 will always correspond with column 3, and so on and so on. It's not really necessary that you put it in the order that it is in your data, in your table, but it also looks clean if you put it in the same order as the table is. So I'm just going to put that back, our module ID, to how it is. So this is our first insert statement. So what we're going to do now is, I'm just going to highlight this, and then we run our query. And you can see now it says my query is completed and 1 row affected. So that just means 1 row was inserted into our table. So since we are performing an insert statement, that means 1 row is inserted. So if you're doing an update and it says 1 row affected, that means 1 row was updated. If you're dealing with delete, it depends on the operation that you're performing at that moment in time. So now it just means 1 row was inserted. So if I go back to selecting all the data in our table, so let's just go and execute the statement. Now you can see that our table has some data. It only has 1 row, which is the row that we inserted here, our DSW001 row. Then it's development software, year 1 with the weight of 1.50. So now if you look at this, when I specified the weight, I didn't give it a 0 here. I just said 1.5, but the 0 is there. And where this is actually coming from is, when I was doing my table, I specified the decimal point for my weight column to have 2 values. So since that it's 5, and you know how numbers work, that means there's a 0 at the end. So your system automatically going to put that 0 for you. So now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do this very same thing for this data here. And we're going to input all the first year modules. So I'm actually going to show you guys multiple ways of inserting multiple rows. So now, since I highlighted all these 3 rows, if I were to execute this, it will input all these 3 rows at the same time. So what it will do is, it will insert the first row, which is our information systems, and then insert the second row, which is our network systems, and then insert the third row, which is our business analyst. And if this were to encounter an error somewhere along, let's say it inserts the first statement and it goes successful, and it tries to insert the second one and it fails, this one will not execute. So whenever or whatever line this fails, it stops there and gives you the feedback that a particular statement went wrong and this is the output. The ones that are below will not execute. It will actually stop there. So what we're going to do now is, let's insert these rows, execute that, and now you can see here that I have 3 feedback of row affected. This is the first row of IFS, this is the second one for communication networks, and this is the third one for business analysts. So if we were to go now and select our data from the table of our table, you can now see that here I actually have 3 more modules. I have communication networks, development software, information systems. So this statement, these 3 rows actually inserted at the same time, or one after another, after we executed by highlighting this. So this is one way of how you can actually insert multiple rows at the same time. But an easier way of inserting multiple rows at the same time, it's by writing something like this. So what you need to do is, it's still the very same way, it's just that you have to tweak it some way somehow. So what you do is still an insert statement. So we say insert into, then we specify our table name, it's modules, then we specify the columns that we'll be inserting the values for. We have our modules ID, the modules name, and we have year, and we have our weight. And now you say values, and if you look at the statement here, the one on the notepad, your notepad on the left, this is actually your first row. It's the same as this, and this is your second row, and this is your third and fourth, and so on. What I'm going to do now is, I'm just going to copy the whole thing here. This data is the same as this data, so it is our second year and our third year modules. So if I just go back here and actually paste that there, so now if you look here, so let me just replace this double quotes with single quotes there, so we don't get those errors. I want to replace double quotes with single quotes. Replace everything. Cool. Let's just do that. What it's missing. We're still getting warnings. What wrong are we doing? So this is our value, just W. Yeah, wait. Oh, it's a values, not value. So values. So if you look at this, it's the same way as inputting or inserting data one row at a time. But now what you do is you specify your first row, and then you say comma, and then you specify your second row, your third row, your fourth row, and so on and so on. So I'm just going to cancel that space there. So this is another way, or a simpler way, of inserting multiple rows at the same time. So what you want to do now is you're just going to highlight whatever you want to execute, and go to execute or press F5. Let's just go and say execute. And now you can see that your feedback actually says 10 rows affected. It doesn't say one row affected, one row affected, one row affected, like 3 times like it did when we were inserting this. So this is the difference, because this statement actually, when we highlighted this, it inserted these 3 rows, 1 row at a time. But when we inserted this, it inserted all those 10 rows at the same time. That's why the feedback here says 10 row instead of saying 1 row affected 10 times. So now, if I were to go and query our table, now you can see that our table has 14 rows, and these are the data that we have in our table. So it's the same data as what we have here in our spreadsheet. It's all the modules that we have for the modules table. And this is actually how you create a table and insert your data. So it's easy like that. So one thing that I want to show you guys, remember when I mentioned that the star here doesn't mean select everything. It actually means select all columns. So you can still say, if you don't want all columns, you can still specify the columns that you want, or you can still specify all the columns one by one like that if you want. It's up to you how you want your data to be. You select your year and your weight, and this is the same as having a star, because it's still going to select so this is not modules, it's modules ID. Modules is actually the name of our table. So this is the same as having a star there. It's still going to select all your columns, but at the same time you can actually specify the columns that you want to retrieve. And there you can see now we don't have our modules ID, it's just the module name, the weight, and the year. So the star, like I said, it doesn't mean select all rows, it means select all columns. Because what you can do is, this might be a bit confusing for you guys, so you can still say star and then say, put something like that there, say top, let's say top 5. So now you can see that we still have the star, but it didn't give us all the rows. Like I said, the star has nothing to do with your rows. It just means select all columns of your table. So the top 5 here just means select the top 5 results of your modules table. So if you're familiar with MySQL, this is the same, or this is the equivalent of limit. So this statement here actually means select top 5 rows of our modules table. So this is how you create your table. This is how you insert your data and query your table. So in the next video, I'll actually be talking to you guys about what this voucher, what this int and the decimal means, what the primary key is, and what it does. And in the next videos, we'll be going through other tables such as the students, the marks, and the GPA table. So this is our entire database. This is what you're going to be working with throughout the series, and we're just going to be using all this data to create our views, our triggers, our constraints, and everything that has to do with the fundamentals of SQL. So in this video, or in these videos, I'll actually try and explain to you guys the logics behind SQL. So I'm not too much worried about syntax, because that is something easy. That is something that you can find the solutions most places on the internet. So what I actually want to achieve in these videos is to teach you guys the best logic of writing code, the best logic of writing statements, because syntax is just something that makes your code looks good or appealing or easy for the next person to read, but it doesn't help to have a nice code that it's easy to read but doesn't run in the best way possible. I was still trying to put the best syntax out there, but my main goal here is to teach you guys the best logics around SQL. So this is it for today's video, and you guys, if you have watched up until this far, don't forget to subscribe and share this video and hit the like button. So I'll see you guys in the next video, where we'll be talking about data types and constraints. So yeah, see you guys in the next video. Cheers.